Hi, and welcome back to Dogs Do Speak with myself, Samantha Wayland. And today we have a wonderful guest in Tom Candy. Tom today will be talking about how do we integrate rescues coming from abroad with the resident dogs that we already have. So that'll be a little bit later. Tom will also explain who he is and what he does. But please hit that subscribe button and please give this a like so you don't get to miss or do miss any of the content that we put out here at Dogs Do Speak. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Tom, like I say to a lot of guests, it's a no-brainer. How can Tom Candy not be on a podcast? How can Tom Candy not be invited to the conference? With your experience, especially around rescues, it's a no-brainer. Tom, would you mind just explaining to those that are watching who you are, and what you do, and a little bit about your history coming into the industry?
Yeah, definitely. Um, my name's Tom Candy, like we've said. I've worked in shelter and rescue for the last 14 years. And as of about 2 days ago, I've spent the last 10 years working specifically with problem behaviours in kennels and rescues. So initially, I started working in one centre with about 40 kennels, supporting all of the dogs' training and behaviour needs there. And then over the last few years, I've built up to working more regionally, covering a range of centres. I primarily focus now on improving behavioural health for animals by empowering staff. So, looking at how we upskill staff to improve behaviour work, how we give them more confidence in assessing behaviour and working through behaviour modification plans. So, my focus very much now is how we improve shelter workforces to be better at behaviour. So, then we get more positive change for the dogs and they get better rehoming outcomes. So, yeah, that's a very brief overview of me.
Wow, that is a good overview, to be quite honest. I mean, Tom, before we go into how we bring two dogs together, one from already in the UK and one coming from abroad, are there differences? Let's just say Romanian dogs coming into the UK. Are there any differences between those guys coming across and let's say the dog just born in Brixton or the East End?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, and this is what makes some of the kind of international rescue aid tricky because in a lot of these countries, the attitudes towards dogs and the way that dogs lives massively varies and differs from how we treat dogs in the UK. A lot of the countries where we are bringing dogs in from abroad, they're either kind of street living dogs or they're definitely not used to a lot of the situations and experiences that we have over here. And that becomes part of the challenge because their experiences, their life, how they've grown up, the experiences that they've had don't really set them up very well for coming over to the UK in a lot of cases. Obviously, from some countries, we still have them living in houses, they're family pets, but more often than not, they're almost like either community dogs where they're kind of looked after by the community, or actually they're just what we would call strays, where they don't have a set abode. They're just kind of wandering around, doing whatever they like, basically. Obviously, that does then pose some of the welfare challenges. You tend to see a lot more dogs that are like hit by vehicles or struggle with lack of veterinary care because there's nobody specifically looking after them. And that tends to be why they either get picked up or why people feel like their welfare is compromised, and that's why they might need to be rescued and brought over to the UK. So you have those differences both just from the experiences that they're having, but also that the way that they're cared for in those different countries. And that very much depends on the country that the dog's coming from as well. It varies massively, even within Europe, how the dogs are treated and what perception there is of the dogs by the general public.
Okay, so obviously, dogs that are coming from abroad, if they were to go into a home on their own, is bad enough. Some will struggle. But then we have I won't call it a problem as such, where owners already have a dog, whether that's a rescue dog or other. And then we bring another dog into the home, yeah, which now poses a problem. How do we get these dogs to? How would you start integrating them? What's the first thing you would be looking to do?
Yeah, it's another really great question. And I suppose the place to start thinking about is like we just talked about, a lot of these dogs are group living, a lot of these dogs in abroad are kind of around other dogs a lot of the times, and we often then perceive them as having these good interactions with dogs. Particularly if you think about it, if you're out starting fights with everybody, you're not going to be very popular. So we actually tend to see dogs getting on quite well in other countries. I think one of the challenges that we maybe have with our UK population of dogs, and I think we're seeing this more and more, is actually they're losing a lot of their communication skills. So in the UK now, especially post-COVID, we spend a lot more time with our dogs on lead. We're not really integrating them. We had this whole portion of dogs that didn't go to puppy classes or, couldn't have more than one walk a day. And that really changes their ability to read other dogs' body language, to listen to those signals, and respond appropriately in that way that you then form those good relationships. Like us, not everybody is going to get on all of the time, but dogs have those ways of communicating and working through those problems that shouldn't lead to aggressive behaviours. But our UK dogs have lost a bit of that in some situations. So often we see these dogs who have come from really doggy areas, they're perceived as good with dogs by the rescue, and then we bring them in. And there's a couple of challenges where we first start that. We've already talked about the difference in living. So that new dog has potentially gone through a really stressful experience. They've just been on a really long journey. Things have changed massively for them. We might not necessarily know what's happened in the country that they're first coming from. And now they're in this new environment with tons of stuff happening. And they've got a dog that they don't know that they've got to get used to. So we have to take that into account. Similarly, if you've got a existing dog, they've now got this other dog turning up who's very stressed and might be responding really differently to other dogs that they've met. Because if they've just used to meeting family dogs or dogs down the park, again, that other dog's response is going to be completely different to what they've previously experienced. So naturally, in some cases, you get this kind of grating or wall between the two dogs before you even start. And I do a lot of work with Trish McMillan, who's a behaviorist who does a lot of shelter stuff in the US, and it's really funny because we always talk about this because in the UK, UK rescues, if you're adopting and you've got another dog, nearly always you bring the dog to the rescue centre to meet. You might go for a bit of a walk, you might let them play off lead, and if that goes well, then you can take the dogs home, and the rescue kind of helps you with that introduction. That's very much the way that I've done things. That did shift a little bit again during COVID, where we were kind of dropping dogs off into homes. But in the States, it's very much more a model of, you go in, you take the dog, and that's it. Like day one, you've taken the dog with you. So it's really about what information we give people to set them up for success. So normally, if we're talking about two dogs who are pretty confident, they're used to that environment, they're not from abroad, what we'd say is things like, you should meet on neutral territory, maybe go for a bit of a walk in the local area, let the dogs kind of sniff and interact a bit. Then when you go back, start in the garden, and then move into the home as that's appropriate and keep an eye on things. That's the very simplified version of how, you'd normally introduce two dogs from the same country. So that added challenge when we then think about a dog who's coming in from abroad is if they're really overwhelmed by that journey, by that travel, you might not have that option of being able to just start out on a walk because that could completely overwhelm the dog. Um, and therefore, you're not going to really see how that relationship plays out. So we need to think about, well, how do we change our process based on these two dogs who are coming from these different places? The first part has to be trying to get the best information that you can from the rescue. So really trying to understand, has the dog literally just been picked up from the streets and brought over, or has it spent some time in a kennel environment, which does happen quite a lot. A rescue will pick a dog up, they'll take them to kennels, and then they'll work with that dog or at least have that dog with them before they then find a home in the UK and move that dog over. So hopefully they should be able to give us a little bit more information as well about how that dog's been with other dogs. And then we can think about, well, how we're going to actually do this. So it might be to start with that we actually don't really have the dogs interacting very much. We might have some barriers up. We can keep a bit of space between them. They can start to the new dog can start to get used to the environment without having to stress about this other dog in the place. Maybe we can do a little bit of scent swapping. So if you've got a blanket that's really familiar for your dog, and that other dog has travelled in on something, or even if you've just got a towel that you can leave in the area, and they can start gaining more information about each other from smell, so they're not even interacting. And then you can focus a little bit on building your relationship too. Now, a lot of it does depend on how that other dog, how the foreign dog is when they first arrive. Because if they seem quite confident and happy, you might be able to kind of speed that process along a bit. But if they're really worried about the environment, we definitely need to think, is introducing our current dog the right thing to do? Or do they just need a couple of days to relax, chill out a little from that tricky journey? What I would be looking for, I guess, to start to then do introductions is that new dog being a little bit more comfortable and happy, at least sniffing, investigating, kind of looking around the environment. And that might be the point where we then start to think, right, okay, can we take them out? Ideally, again, if they can go out on lead, maybe we can start in the garden or just go on a really quiet walk. But if we've got dogs who are really worried, really shut down, when they first come in, that's where we might get a couple more challenges, and we might need to think a bit more carefully about how we do that introduction.
That's really interesting what you said about the difference between UK dogs and overseas dogs, because obviously I work with overseas, but one of my dogs is a UK dog, and I say all the time he has no like doggy common sense. He
Yeah.
is very much he will jump up and stare at a dog, and he's just staring. I'm like, what are you doing? You're so rude. He's got no doggy manners. Whereas every dog from Cyprus or Romania, they can read the body language. They're very, obviously because that's how they've survived. But the dogs from the UK, they really don't seem to have that bit where they've never had to, I suppose, survive. So it's really interesting that you've pointed that out, that is, because I did think I just had a very rude sausage dog for a little while, and maybe he just missed that lesson at puppy school. But yeah, it's really interesting to see the differences between the dogs. So when you're bringing dogs over, obviously the ideal is that they would come and maybe hopefully go to a foster home before coming in to a home. But we know obviously that a majority of the time it is the middle of the night, a dog is dropped off at a home, or you meet them at the services, and it's
Yeah.
it's not ideal. Um, what would you sort of say is the very, very first step then for bringing your dog in? They've just got off the bus, you've brought them into the house, and you've got maybe one or two other dogs. What would your very, very first thing be?
Yeah, for me, I think it would be that separation to start with, just not even bother. Like they've literally just got out of the car, everything's new. Just have your dogs in a space that they're really used to, really comfortable with, and then set up a nice quiet space for that new dog to settle in. And then maybe in the morning the next day, then you do your scent swapping. And if you see lots of kind of interest in that smell, really relaxed behaviors, maybe then we can start to think, oh yeah, okay, right, how do we bring them together? Do we have that garden that we can go into and kind of manage that interactions? Is the new dog going to tolerate being on lead? And we can do a little bit of a walk. But I think we really do need to recognize that time to just decompress a bit when they first arrive with us. Like if anybody here has done long travel, you're just knackered when you get in. Like whatever you do, I'm really used to driving, and the other week I had to do like a 7 hour drive, which is, more than I regularly do, and I was just exhausted. I literally just got in and went to bed. Um, and that's, arriving at my house that I'm really comfortable with. So it's obviously really exciting when you first bring a new dog home and you want them to get on with the dogs in the house, but sometimes just actually having a breath and having a break is the best thing to move forward, because the last thing that you want to do is try and do an interaction and not go very well, and then next time you go to do it you're more worried, you're more apprehensive, because there's already been that tension or negativity between the new dog and the existing dogs.
But in other words, really, there should be no rush in bringing two dogs together.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And when we talk about barriers, maybe we should set the home up with barriers just in case, because it's better to have the barriers set up in the first place than having to look around to set them up if it's all going
100%.
wrong.
Definitely, and I would as say, if you're in a situation like Sam's just described with the dogs arriving maybe later, I would just think of a solid barrier. Let's make it really easy. Let's have the dog behind a closed door. Ideally, if you've got a hallway or somewhere, so they're not kind of interacting through the door, that's even better. And then the next few days, whilst we work things out, maybe we can go to a bit more of a partial barrier, like a stair gate, where they can start to see each other, they can start to sniff. Um, Interestingly, as I'm sort of talking through this, when we're thinking about dogs from abroad where we maybe don't have the experience, they're having lots of new changes. It's almost like introducing two cats together rather than two dogs. Like with cats, we start much slower. We do a lot of scent swapping. They get used to each other, because cats are sort of semi-social. They don't have to be social, like dogs who obviously are more pro-social. Um, but that's really what we're thinking about. And I think your point about rushing is such a good one, Colin, because these dogs are going to live together forever, hopefully, if we get this right, touch wood. And let's think about the other situations where we live with people forever, hopefully, where we form new relationships. We don't go straight in. We might maybe go for dinner or something, have a bit of a walk, then we'll have a break, and I think it's very much the same when we are bringing these new dogs home, and particularly where we maybe don't have as much information about their background. That's the big part. Like, yes, if we've got a dog, they're really super confident. They've been in the UK for a little bit, like Sam was saying, in foster or whatever. They've met a couple of dogs. Then maybe we can follow that more uh, simple, I suppose, route of, well, let's go for a bit of a walk and see how they get on. But where we're lacking that information or they've just arrived, it's really important that we do take it slow. Because if we get it right the first time, it'll be right forever. A touch wood, obviously niggles in between. Um, but we all know first impressions last, and it can be challenging if we get that wrong.
I totally agree there. First impressions last. Um, it must be extremely difficult. I mean, it's easy for us here, sat here talking about it, but I'm now trying to picture some clients, how difficult it was or has been from the moment their rescue arrived. Their resident dog is either okay about it or not okay about it. The rescue dog that has arrived is now really, really, like, I wouldn't say shut down, but really doesn't know what to do. So their body language is not easy to read. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
What
definitely. And it falls back on what we were just saying, doesn't it? Like, um, I do think UK dogs have changed, and this is a conversation that we're having a lot of them in it. But I went to Bulgaria 2, maybe even 3 years ago now, and when I first started working in rescue 10 years ago, we had two dogs in every kennel. Most dogs shared a kennel when they came into rescue because of space, and it's better for them in a lot of ways. Um, and now it's really hard for a range of reasons. Some of it is staff confidence, but also a lot of these dogs really struggle to be in that small space with other dogs. When I went to Bulgaria, they've got kennels of dogs with sort of three, four, five dogs in, and yes, they have disagreements and they have to move the dogs around. But again, what we were saying, what Sam was saying earlier, that communication skill is so massively different. But obviously, even the best communicator, if you're stressed or worried, or you've never seen a washing machine before and now you're living in a kitchen, that is going to change your priorities. And we have to think of it as like a hierarchy. So Linda, a really good one that I like is the Hierarchy of Dog Needs by Linda Michaels. And right at that bottom, we've got our biological needs, and that includes our safety and security. And then the next step up on the pyramid is our social needs. Well, it's a pyramid for the reason that if we don't have that bottom one down, if we're not happy with our biological needs being met, then we can't move up into that social needs realm. So if you're a bit anxious, you're stressed, maybe a bit uncomfortable because you've been sat in a van for X amount of time or on a plane, you're not going to be in that mindset to start to form new relationships or think about it. So that becomes part of the challenge, definitely.
So if we're then looking at what comes into the home, we're going to look to take things slow, nice and easy. And what I find a lot of clients struggle with is knowing that right time to go into that garden, put on the leads and distances. So
Mm.
we look at distances. I always say, use your garden to its fullest extent. Yeah. Take one dog out first to the furthest point, so you haven't got to go round that dog at the nearest point. Is that something you would advise?
Yeah, definitely. I think what we have to distance is always a tricky one because what we can also create with distance is frustration. So if
Yeah.
we've got two dogs who actually really want to get to know each other, um, that distance could be difficult. But from a safety point of view, from a sensibility point of view, we definitely need to start with that distance. But maybe what we think about is having a slightly longer lead than we would normally use. So maybe like a 5 meter lead, so that we can give them a little bit more freedom and choice, but still kind of manage that situation. But equally, we don't want the dogs running up together. And often when I used to do introductions with UK dogs, the owners would be like, "Oh," or more so when we were looking at putting them into kennels or anything, they'd be chilling, they'd sort of just be sniffing around each other or doing their own thing, but not really paying attention. And lots of people, when you first start doing introductions, you think, "Oh, well, they should be playing, they should be really happy to be around each other." But actually, that's not what you want, because that's not what they're going to be like 90% of the time. We know dogs, it's short bursts of play and then they're off doing their own thing. So actually, yes, being able to go into the garden, sniff, investigate, something that's really useful is just walking around the edges as well. So anywhere where there's a barrier or a natural barrier, like a hedge or anything, there's traditionally more smell. The dog was going to spend more time kind of investigating, and they could hopefully be looking up and paying attention to the other dog and then going back and doing their own thing again. And you can let the dog decide that distance. So if they're relaxed and loose and they look like they want to kind of interact, we can do that together. And if you've got the space, or again, your dog's confident when you can actually go out a little bit outside of the garden, what can be really useful is circling. So does this video go out?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Then. So you're sort of walking like this, separate, and then rather than walking up to each other, which is what lots of dogs try and do, is go nose to nose, which for a lot of dogs can be quite worrying, quite scary, not really the best interaction. What we want to do as the owners is walk in a bit of a circle so that we're both walking around each other at a bit of a distance, and the dogs can start to pick up different smells from each other. They can start to have those interactions. It's not as threatening or intense as that nose to nose introduction. And then if that's going well, then we can get closer together. And they can have a little interaction. And this really is where our kind of 3 to 5 second rule comes in, and we can count out a couple of seconds and then move off and either go for a little wander around the garden, or like we said, if we are out and about, we can kind of continue our walk and let them have that couple of seconds of interaction and then move off. What you don't want is that really intense interaction where there's a lot of big feelings, and that maybe spills over because we've not done a great job of helping the dogs manage the situation. If they're not respecting each other's space or communication, it's our job to step in and say, right, okay, let's have a little bit more distance, go and sniff, go and wander, and then come back together later to see what happens.
Yeah, I love that. Going back to the frustration bit, obviously a lot of dogs that come over, especially from like shelters, so like Romanian shelters, for instance, a lot of those dogs won't have ever been on a lead before. They'll have never experienced that, oh my God, unless they've been tied up somewhere or something. How do you then go about doing those introductions if you then have a dog that comes into the home that is then terrified of the thought of even being on a lead, let alone being on a lead, and then another dog there as well. How would you go about that?
Yeah, another great question. And this comes back to what we were talking about earlier, doesn't it? Of those kind of overall challenges. That first situation that we talked through is like top tier level. Dogs settled in, now they're super happy that they're in the house and they can move about. Um, and this is possibly where it gets a bit challenging, and it is going to depend a lot on the dog. But what I would say is that if your dog is confident, well, hopefully a lot more confident on the lead because they're much more used to it, maybe it's our dog that needs to be on the lead to start with. And I'm only using our dog versus the new dog because it's quite hard on a podcast to associate them out. But obviously, the dog that's been with you longer, they're both your dogs. But maybe they're the ones that need to be on lead a little bit, just so we've got a little bit of management. But also, this is where our barriers can still be useful, and this is where it maybe gets a bit different to how we would normally do introductions, because in a lot of situations, we're not going to get two dogs to meet through a stair gate as their first meeting. But like you said, if we've got a dog who's really uncomfortable or not used to being on lead, that might be our best option. But I would still have the dog who is a bit more confident on lead, because again, even though they're behind a stairgate and they might not be able to get to each other, if there is any animosity, we still want to be able to call the existing dog away so that they can have that bit more space. And particularly if we've got a dog who is a bit worried or shut down, they're not really moving about as much, that's a really good opportunity whilst they're away, because that might help bring them out of their shell. It might be more scary for them, but that's just information that we can take away. The but yeah, so the if the dog's like in a room behind a stairgate and they're a bit away from the stairgate, then yeah, bringing our existing dog up to the stairgate to investigate and again start that send transfer process, really kind of look at how they're responding to each other is going to tell us the next steps. Because if that other dog then starts to come out of their shell a bit, well, actually, maybe the introduction is important to do a bit quicker because that's going to benefit the new rescue. Or if they're just like, absolutely not, this is way too scary, then we know, okay, let's keep them separate for a little bit longer. Um, like we said at the start, it's tricky, isn't it? Because you are really excited. You do want the dogs to get on. But, if we're potentially talking about a 10-year relationship here, maybe a couple of days or even a week or two of being separated isn't the biggest um, difficulty for us to live through. It might be a little bit more to manage, but it might lead to those better long-term outcomes.
So would you also say, Tom, that it's very important that we professionals give the right advice to the humans and supporting them as best as we possibly can? Because at the end of the day, we are there, then we leave. So we want them really to be successful. Yeah. Because I'm a believer that if I am successful, the dog is more likely to follow. Yeah. Instead of me just thinking the dog needs to be successful, but I think I do too, so that we, can go down the lead or what have you. Is that something you do? You work a lot with the clients as well?
Yeah, and I think you raised a really good point earlier, Colin, about actually like how prepared are we for this before it happens? Because we can have a lot in place. And especially like Sam was saying, if the dog is in foster, you can do that scent swapping even before the dog comes home.
Mm.
But have we got our barriers in sensible places? Are the owners confident with what to do when it happens? Have we thought about where the dogs' beds are? Like, have they got independent spaces, but also space that they can be around each other if they want to? How are we sorting resources out? Because that might be a bit more of a concern than actually the normal introductions. Like, where does your existing dog currently get fed? Is there a different space that the new dog can be fed in, separate, or at a time where we're always around to start with? If and even things like if our dog is used to free feedings, they have food down all of the time. Well, maybe for a week or two before the new dog comes in, actually they need to get used to some set meal times because you just don't really want anything that could be a big source of conflict when they first happen. It's slightly different, but my dog isn't great with other dogs. She can meet other dogs and she can get on well. So if we have people come and stay with a dog that she knows, all of the toys go away. We have a drawer with dog treats that goes upstairs. We just try and we've got a coffee table. So we've got like an L-shaped sofa with a coffee table in the middle. And we've had it a few times where the dogs have got stuck because they end up face to face. So now if a dog comes, the coffee table goes against the wall as well. So we've got much bigger spaces. So as a professional, even going in and spotting these trigger points, these hot points, these difficulties that people might find can be really useful for doing that. And then what we can also do is maybe have a package or whatever if you support rescue dogs coming in from abroad, and then people can send you videos of those different stages. How are the dogs interacting through the baby gate? And that professional can then give more advice about, yeah, okay, actually, I think it would be good, or oh, it does look like there's a little bit of animosity. Maybe like maybe I can come and support, so you've got a bit more confidence, or we can do a couple more days of scent swapping, or whatever that looks like based on the information that's being presented to us.
Okay. Whilst you were talking, I was just thinking of, let's just say the rescue that has arrived is completely shut down. How would we go about, this might be a silly question actually, how would we go about that particular dog coming out of their shell and integrating in the house? Not necessarily with the resident dog, but just with the environment itself. What steps would you take with a dog that's just shut down?
Yeah, so there's a few things that we really want to focus in on. And for me, the three things that jump to mind straight away when we're working with shutdown dogs, whether that's in a house, in kennels, whatever situation, is how we can give that feeling of safety, how we can add some predictability, and how we can add agency. So the ability to kind of control your own actions and environment. So like we talked about, it might be that we've set up that nice space for the dog to be in. And to start with, we just focus on building a little bit of a relationship with us. And I actually think what we often don't consider is what happens when we're not there. So
Mm.
often you see people who might be trying to throw treats to the dog or really encourage them out, and that puts a lot more pressure on the situation. But actually, if we just kind of leave really positive things and then go, what you might find is the dog then naturally starts to explore a bit more, interact a bit more when we're not there, and then we can gradually start to pair those two things together to start to build that relationship. We want to create that really secure base, so a good relationship that that dog can draw some safety from with us, and we want to try and avoid any situations that are going to add to that dog's negative bank account. So the way that we can kind of think of that is our need to do now and then our things that can wait. So, do we need to be touching, fussing, stroking the dog, trying to put a collar on them straight away? Probably not if they're in a safe situation. Do we need to be able to clean around them if they're not going out to the garden or whatever? Then yeah, possibly. But how do we protect the dog in that moment? So how can we make it really clear, really predictable when that's going to happen? Do we do that first thing? Um, and it's tricky to do with a dog that is in the house, but any routine that we can put into place that adds that little bit of predictability is again going to start to make things a little bit more safe and secure for that dog. And at the same time, we can start to ask questions. And that always seems like a little bit of a strange consideration. But when we think of giving our dog agency, that's what we're talking about. So if we've built up the experience of leaving some treats around and then going out, well, this time, can we put some treats around and take a couple of steps back and even sort of sit and start reading a book or scrolling on your phone and see if the dog then chooses to maybe come out and start to investigate and explore a bit more? I'm sure you'll agree with this as well, Colin. I think scent can be really useful in these times because, again, if we think about that hierarchy of dog needs that we talked of earlier, if you're really worried, maybe you're not thinking too much about food or eating or anything like that. But smell is often something that dogs will engage with. Um, Even if they are feeling a little bit more worried. So bringing in some different smells, and again, leaving the dog alone to start with, to start to investigate them, and then we can, if we find things that the dog's really interested in, we can start to pair them with us. Um, and it seems a bit strange maybe to say, like use those barriers. Let's keep the dog in a small space. But again, we want them to feel safe. We want them to build that safe experience. And then they might naturally start to explore themselves too. And that's ultimately the best thing because we've talked about agency as well, is we want them to start to make that decision to bring them out. What we don't want to be doing is like trying to clip them onto lead or reading, sort of actively moving them to try and get them to engage more. Because if they're making those decisions, it's gonna it's going to improve more quickly, even though it might feel like it's slow moving to start.
Without touching on it, we sort of touched on it. Human expectation.
Yeah.
The expectation the human has, which is not in alignment with the dog's feelings at that moment in time. That is a very difficult one. How do we get people to stop having those kind of expectations and just allowing the dog to be? Yeah. So you came up with some very good factors there, and things we could do is like giving the dog something they can interact with and leave them be. Yeah, because they're more likely to, what's the word, slowly start to express themselves. But as humans, we will have expectations, which is difficult. I mean, how do we get across to these people? How do we get across to owners, guardians, that expectations need to be tailored or have none in the first place? Just grow with what the dog gives us.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is in the conversations that we're having, how we pass that information over. But also, what I find useful is like we've already mentioned, this you're going to have this dog for a long time, so it
Yeah,
doesn't matter if we take things slow to start with. And what I might do if I'm working with an owner before their dog comes home is say, right, okay, let's write a list of things that you want to do with your dog. So that might be going to the pub or being able to do a nice long walk in these different areas, and we can maybe start to say, right, okay, well, how can we break that down so we are meeting the owners a little bit where they want to be as well. Now obviously that is going to depend on the dog, but yeah, if it is something like let's use going to the pub example. It might be quite an extreme one for a dog coming in from abroad, but is it something like, right, okay, well, what we can do is there's this really good loop here with a pub at the end, so why don't we get the dog used to the walk a little bit to start with when they're ready for walks, and then maybe on a quiet, weekday, we can stop there in the evening and just sit outside for a bit. And build it up so we can look at what people's expectations are and help them realize how to break those expectations down a bit. I think there is definitely a place for just saying, let's see what the dog wants to do and having that conversation with people too. But we need that kind of weigh up of both sides because owners are ultimately they're going to be excited to do these things and we want to help support them do them in the right way rather than just say, oh no, you definitely shouldn't do that. It's going to be too much for the dog. We do want them to understand that and what to look out for if they're spotting these signs, but helping them recognize their expectations is also useful in these situations. We've also got our good old rule of three. So thinking about things like how many days it actually takes for a dog to settle in, but recognize. So sorry. So for people who haven't heard of the of three before, it's this idea that you have 3 days, 3 weeks, and 3 months, and they're kind of different stages of the dog settling in. So the first 3 days, everything's new. We want to keep it really quiet, really get the dog used to the environment. The first 3 weeks, we maybe see a bit more from the dog. We can start to open their world up a little bit, just slowly and gradually. And then 3 months, we start to maybe see a bit more of the true colors and we can start to introduce more things. The thing with the rule of three is it's very much more of a guideline. Every dog is going to be individual where they sit on that journey. And particularly when we're talking about dogs coming in from abroad, more often than not, those periods are going to be really elongated because of all the changes that we talked about at the start of the episode. But that can be another useful starting place to kind of speak to owners and say, right, okay, when the dog first comes in, they're going to struggle. So what sort of things can we be doing with the dog then? Okay, what about now? What about then? And like you said, setting the expectation of actually not having expectations is the best bet. but where expectations exist, helping the owners tweak and change them to probably fit into what the reality is going to be. And what I normally say is we can always move faster than this based on the dog. This is our best, how do we create the best case scenario for the dog? And we might find that actually in doing that, we're able to move a little bit forward. It's always better to tweak because things are going well than having to tweak because the dog is struggling. Because, like
Yeah.
we've said, once we start to create negative experiences, it's much harder to then change. If we're taking our small steps, it's much better. The classic example of a jigsaw, we never give a 3-year-old a 1,000 piece jigsaw. They're not going to do it, they're not going to enjoy it. We start with little pieces, but if they're really good at jigsaws and they really enjoy it, we can start making it complicated quite easy.
Tom, I can't even do a 10-piece jigsaw, let alone that many. Um, Now that we're talking more about the humans, I know we're mainly looking at new dog coming into the home, resident dogs already there. But what about the humans that are already there? This dog's now confronted with a brick, porta cabin, if you like. There's a dog already here, and there's all these people milling about. I suppose we need to be what's the word? Setting ourselves up for the dog to be successful in organising ourselves prior to the dog's arrival. Does that make sense? Not over fussing, not too many people gathering.
Yeah, 100%. And it's another useful exercise that people can do when they first get a dog is talk about, again, what uh, the potential rules are going to be. So, especially if we've got little people in the house, coming up with some rules together, like he said, not over fussing, giving them really clear criteria. So, if we're interacting with the dog, we're going to do that for 3 seconds, and then we're going to stop and see what the dog wants to do. With any learners, when we're talking about non-human learners and our human learners, it's always better to be really clear on what our expectations are, what we want them to do, rather than don't just overfuss the dog. So we can come up with those rules as part of the excitement of that new dog going home. That can go up on the fridge or whatever in a WhatsApp group if it is more adult learners. And then we can kind of, at least we've got that to refer back to when stuff maybe does start to get a little bit too exciting. But you're also totally right. We also want to think about what our diary looks like for the next few weeks. Not having a big dinner party of people coming over. When we've got a new adult rescue dog coming in, not having regular visitors. Everybody's super excited to come and meet the new dog, but just saying, hey, we're getting to know the dog a little bit more. Once they're settled in, we'll give you a shout and we'll come and meet you on a walk or whatever that situation is. But again, thinking about that before the dog comes home is super important. And I just think, yeah, having people actually visualize and think and then write down is really useful for then actually carrying that plan forward in your head. And even things like, is the dog, if it, I know we're talking about existing dogs in the home here, but what is the rule around the sofa? What is the rule about going upstairs? So that at least they've got some consistency as well when they first come in and everybody's treating the dog in the same way.
That does make a lot of sense because it's easy to just be focused on the resident dogs meeting with the new dog coming into the home. But the humans already in the home also need their boundaries, need their set of rules. Because I don't know about you guys, I tend to find it's not so much the resident dog that spooks the new dog. It tends to be the humans in the home that make it all go worse. So they're all really, really good points. Tom, would you say that there is, let's just say I'm getting myself a rescue, I have to do all my research, blah, 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 blah. Is there anything that I need before that rescue comes to my home?
Oh, it's a good question. I think the most important thing is having that nice, safe place that the dog has its own. So you might sometimes hear it's that kind of referred to as a safe haven.
Mhm.
And the rules around a safe haven are it is the dog's space, and we can call the dog out of the space, but we don't go into that dog space. It becomes a really safe, secure place for them to be. And that's things just like having a nice, comfy bed, some blankets. And again, if the dog's coming off a transporter van, ask for the blanket because sometimes they might take it away again. And if you're really on it, have a couple of blankets that the rescue can take back with them or can take and use, so that they maybe don't feel as bad giving you the blanket. But it's important that we have that kind of familiar smell for the dog. Um, and yeah, so to be able to create that space. And then this slight tangent to your question, but often with dogs, we're really keen to bath them because they smell when they come out of a kennels normally. But even that familiar smell, maybe like we just need to chill out for a minute and leave the dog kind of settle in before we do things like bathing. Because even other than the stress of having a bath, we're removing all of that familiarity from the dog, and that can be quite stressful for them. If we work in brick and mortar kennels, so we've got kennels, brick and mortar rescues where we've got kennels, think about how much we clean as well. Like if we're cleaning every day, fully cleaning the kennel, we're taking away all of that familiarity. So that was a slight tangent that I went down. But having that kind of comfortable area that dog can rest, where they've got everything as well. So they've got food and water. They're not having to go exploring for it. And actually, can they have a bit of a partial barrier so that they are around the corner, or if we're using a crate with the door open, can it be covered? So again, they feel like they've got a little bit of security in the situation. So really thinking about those sort of things can be helpful too. There is some evidence, although it's very varied, about things like plugins, so a pet remedy or Adaptil, to help again just make that dog feel a little bit more comfortable. What I would say, particularly with pet remedy, because it's got a little bit more of a smell than Adaptil, is don't have it like exactly in the bed area. Have it plugged in the room, but a little bit away, so that really intense smell isn't near the bed. And that can be a concern as well with some of the sprays that we can use. So it's useful to spray like a flannel or a small bit of cloth and just have it in the area, but not directly on where the dog is going to hopefully be resting. Um, what else do you need? And then I think as well, just having some really good contact details. So, like we said, think about finding a trainer before issues arise, just to check through things. And then if something does happen, you're a bit worried, you are a bit concerned, you need some help. You're not kind of having to find all of that after. Do you know where your vets is? All of that sort of stuff.
Those are some great points. And I have to say, the smell of an overseas dog that is newly arrived is a very particular smell that I do have to, it's one of the things that I do warn people of. The smell is, it's a particular note. But we've obviously touched on quite a few things that we want to do nice and slowly because, of the danger or the worry of things going wrong. Are there times where you actually think, do you know what, if we bring the dogs in and they meet each other, it's actually going to help the overseas or the new dog, the new rescue dog? It'll help build their confidence.
Yeah, definitely. Like those social interactions can be really good for bringing that dog forward as well. And I think that's why using things like the kind of open barriers can be helpful because you'll get an idea straight away if that dog is interested. And a lot of it is knowing your own dog too. So how are they in different situations? Are they super wiggly and super playful all of the time and they're really good at respecting space? Or you might be a bit more confident to bring that dog in earlier, versus if your own dog's a bit unsure and standoffish as well, and maybe that slower approach can be helpful. So it's really based on what you're seeing when that dog comes in, and that's why it's useful to do things like what's it, prepare for the worst, hope for the best. So if they've got an area in a quiet corner, but actually they're out exploring straight away, you're like, oh great, win. We can move on. None of these are like set steps of you definitely wait 3 days before they introduce you to the other dog, and then another 2 days before you do a walk or whatever. It's just keep an eye on that body language. We want nice, relaxed, wiggly, comfortable body language, and the dog coming out exploring and investigating and sniffing and doing all the things that we want dogs to do. And if we're seeing those, absolutely no worries with moving forward a bit. I suppose the thing to think of is that positive bank account model, isn't it? So every interaction that we have with a dog adds to their bank account or takes something away. And what we want to do is try and give as many positive experiences as possible through all of those interactions, through adding positive things to the situation, so that we build and build that bank account. And then if something scary happens or something negative happens, the dog can make a withdrawal and we're not going into debt. We're not having to use our overdraft. We're staying nice and comfortably um, in the black, and we've got that nice cushion if something does happen. Because, with the best will in the world, they could be super confident, and then all of a sudden, like we said, the washing machine turns on, or we drop a pan, and they've never been in the house and hid a pan on the floor, and that can spook them. So yeah, it's really that individual dog, knowing your own dog, and maybe if they haven't met a lot of dogs before or they haven't spent much time with other dogs in their house, have you got friends that we can start this process with as well, so that we're setting both the dogs up for success. They've both had some good experiences of meeting other dogs.
Um, that has been really, 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 really informative. It's I want to remember the one about the blanket because it never crossed my mind, but it makes so much sense. Yeah. So, Tom, thank you for coming on to Dogs Do Speak podcast today. Um, it was a no-brainer. It would have been silly not to have asked you. So please, everyone, please hit that subscribe button. Please give this a like so you don't miss anything that we put out in the future. For now, it's going to be goodbye from myself and goodbye from Sam and goodbye from Tom, but Tom will be back in the future. Bye for
Yeah,
now.
I'd love to come back. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.